program is rated GE. Content carried in here is suitable for general family viewing.
Hello there, we are glad you tuned to Law Matters, a show that is educative, informative, and offers legal aid solutions to what we face in our day-to-day lives. Tonight we're talking about the issue of rule of law, an interesting discussion in the country concerning the implementation of the rule of law here in the country. Remember, you can send in your questions and feedbacks on our social media platforms at KUTV Kenya on Facebook, at KUTV_Kenya on Twitter, and KUTV Kenya on YouTube. My name is Irene Mwangi, but before we get into this interesting discussion concerning the implementation of the rule of law in Kenya, let me allow my guest to introduce himself kindly.
Hello, thank you. My name is Roger Sutieno Odhiambo. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, but I also teach law at the African Nazarene University.
All right.
I'm a senior lecturer there.
Thank you, Advocate Otieno, for making time concerning this particular discussion. It is really an interesting discussion here in the country when we talk about the rule of law. And at a time where, world over, the Constitution of Kenya is deemed as one of the best legal documents that we have world over. From where you sit, do you think the Constitution is supreme, which, is part of the component of the rule of law? Or do you think sometimes political interest override it, so to speak?
Yeah, of course. Yes, I agree absolutely with you that since 2010, Kenya has had a very transformative constitution, which, of course, right now we can say that we are under constitutional supremacy as opposed to what we had before, that is parliamentary sovereignty. So the constitution is supreme. And of course, is what gives us one of the principles of the Constitution. Of course, is the rule of law, which is a very fundamental principle of the Constitution.
All right.
Yes.
So, when you look at the implementation of the Constitution in the country, and you look at those given the mandate to ensure that the law is implemented, it is enforced, and it is held supreme, do you think they have really met the threshold to ensure that we actually respect the supremacy of the Constitution, or over time, do political interest or interest generally get into the way of it?
Generally, I think my observation is that we haven't done well as a people, not just those who are in leadership, but also the citizenry, because the citizenry also has a role. But we haven't done well. We say that law actually mirrors social norms. Law is about the society. It reflects the social norms of a particular community or a particular society.
Yes.
And therefore, the principles and the values that we have in the Constitution should actually reflect who we are as a people. But unfortunately, more often than not, we actually see the opposite. And so therefore, in my view, there's still a problem. We still have a long way to go, to the extent that sometimes one wonders whether the values that we have in the Constitution are really Kenyans' values, or could we just call them constitutional values? Do they really reflect who we are as a people? And I say so because of our disregard of the Constitution. Yes, by different players, whether you talk about the executive, whether you talk about the judiciary sometimes, whether you talk about the legislature, the three arms of government, as it were. But also, look at, again, which is always left, the role of ordinary citizens in obeying the Constitution, because the law is there to protect us. The law is there to bring order in society. And of course, without order, then this, of course, without social order, then this anarchy, which is the opposite. So what the Constitution demands from every Kenyan, whether you are an ordinary citizen or whether you are the president or whether you are the chief justice or whether you are the parliamentarian, is that the law commands obedience because the law is doing our work.
Yeah.
The law is trying to protect us as a people. So it's simply doing our work as a society.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So we must, the law demands obedience forthwith.
All right. So before we get into the components that are there in terms of the rule of law, that is separation of power, equality before the law, what informed the aspect of the rule of law, looking from where we've come to where we are? What informed the enforcement of the rule of law in this country? Was it something that was outrightly, an outlier that people saw that indeed there's a need to be a rule of law to ensure that there's equality of the people and there's supremacy of the law? Looking into the journey that has been there to get to the rule of law, what really informed that?
I think historically we have had issues as a country, whether you want to think of those issues in terms of the human rights violations in Kenya, whether you want to think of those issues in terms of the arbitrariness, use of power by those who wield the instrument of power. So in the past, the president then was everything, was a law unto himself. So a lot of violations of human rights, discrimination of ordinary people, the voice of the ordinary people actually kind of, for lack of a better term, taken away.
Yeah.
And therefore there was need into issues of accountability.
Yes.
So there was need to reimagine a new Kenya, as it were. And therefore the 2010 Constitution came up with this principle of a fundamental principle of law, that is the rule of law, which is about everyone is equal before the law. So as to whether there's equality, yes, we can examine that. We can actually talk about whether there's equality, but the fundamental principle of rule of law is about equality.
Yes.
Is about accountability. Is about limits on how those who wield power exercise their power so that they cannot be able to. It's also about protection of fundamental rights of the citizens.
All right.
Yes.
So when you look about when we take a look into the component of equality before the law, do you think it's being implemented, or are we seeing an issue of preferential treatment in terms of the wealthy? And this is especially when you hear Kenyans joke that if the high and mighty, violate the constitution, they are sort of shielded, but wait until somebody in Kibra steals chicken from his neighbor, he'll face the wrath of the law. Is equality before the law something that is actually implemented?
We see that all the time, the example that you have alluded to. In my view, in Kenya, no, we seem to be still far away from equality before the law. Why do I say that? We have had incidents in this country where, for example, we have incidents or allegations of an MP or a parliamentarian, which is a government official, shoots somebody, and then they go to court, and then they are asked to, there's lack of sufficient evidence, as we've always seen, the powerful always interfere with evidence collection, and then, so for the court, there's lack of evidence. But even above that, then this individual is told, then you have paid so much money, have been taking the care of the bills of this particular individual, you cannot ignore that. And the court agrees with him. And then he he gets away with it, so to say. That will not happen to ordinary people. We have had examples of police going beyond, misusing their powers. I mean, last year, I think, is an example that we can reflect on. We have seen young people being abducted, being killed, disappearing. Then the police say they do not know who is doing this. The government actually is telling us that they don't know who is actually responsible. But then we have also had cases where Inspector General of Police is summoned to go to court. What does he do? He doesn't show up. 7 summonses. He does not show up. I'm not sure whether you and I would even survive even one. So, I mean, there are serious issues with this notion of equality before the law.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, let me just make a very controversial statement that humanity seems to me as it's not a quality that is shared by all.
Okay.
There are those who are more human than others. There are those who are inhuman. I'll give you another example. When Barack Obama came, when he was the president of the United States of America, and he came in this country, I think that was about 2015, the streets were cleaned up. The street families were rounded up and put into some trucks, and then they disappeared because a very important person was coming in town. Yeah, could not afford to see this kind of people. Yes, we have seen all these problems, whether you want to talk about how we have taken life, because one of the things that the rule of law is supposed to do is to protect. To protect liberty, to protect life. But then we can see how then society, where we are, how then you can even talk about issues of femicide, or these are the killings of the protesters, and all, because they are not human beings. I saw the former Attorney General saying when his son was abducted, and he said at least he called how many people could call the president and then talk to the director of NIS to release his son, and then we are talking about the rule of law. Yes. So the issue of equality, I mean, I could talk about so many issues, but the issue of equality is not. But then again, as we talk about the rule of law, I don't know whether I'm jumping the gun, but I've just remembered it, that we must also look at ourselves as citizens, whether we also respect those laws, because we're also accountable.
Yeah, we have a part to play.
And our actions are also accountable, not just the executive, but also we have a part to play. Look at the ordinary citizens going about their daily business. Look at the matatu industry. You are picked from one station, you've said you are going to such a place, and then you can be dropped anywhere. Look at the way we drive. We don't even obey traffic rules in this country. If you try to obey, you stop at the traffic because the lights are red. Somebody right behind you would be hooting, saying you're wasting their time. Yes. So all these things, people really don't care. We are not even mindful of others. So I think for me, it's a serious issue that Kenyans must have a conversation about.
All right.
Yes.
So still on equality before the law, we cannot talk about it without looking into the legal justice system. In the case whereby we have seen for the high-profile cases, it's sort of delayed. But when it comes to minor offenses, they are quickly expanded by the courts.
Yes.
Which begs the question, is it some sort of a framework in our judicial system, or is it now what we are seeing in terms of the gaps in ensuring equality before the law? Because people argue justice delayed is justice denied. When something takes 10 years, 8 years, even if ultimately justice will be offered, the delay causes some sort of anguish. So when you look into our legal system and the aspect of equality, before the law, how do you see the implementation of that?
Yeah, when we talk about the rule of law, another key aspect of it is the idea of justice and fairness. So maybe to answer your question directly, if you look at our judicial system, you still realize that the wealthy in society are more favored.
Yes.
How many people, if you go to industrial area remand, are toiling there for the last 2 years simply because, or even more, because they are not able to afford even the bail, because they don't have money.
Yes.
But then the individuals have the money. And yet, we are talking about the issue of fair trial. We are talking about fairness, because the rule of law embodies the idea of the notion of fairness in it. But then you are talking about right to even a fair trial, right to legal representation. If you do not have money, you cannot even afford a lawyer. Yes, even those who do pro bono, sometimes they do it once, and then the second time, they can't go to court forever. So again, the law would appear to me as the law favors the wealthy in society. Yes.
So do you think then there was a proposal to have the alternative, dispute resolution in terms of ensuring that we deal with the backlog of cases? Because the argument at the time was that the backlog of cases is what is causing these particular delays. But at the same time, even with the alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, the goodwill is not there in terms of ensuring fairness in dealing with these cases. So from where you sit and, looking into the law, having interacted with the law, is alternative way of resolving cases the solution, or is it an issue of goodwill or the rot that is there in the judicial system?
Yeah, we can talk about alternative dispute resolution mechanism in the context of cases that are in court.
Yes.
But if you look at data, if you look at statistics, I just can't remember, I once came across a study that was conducted, this kind of thing, way back in 2001, 2000, thereabout, that actually shows that 90% of cases in this country are resolved through what we call alternative disputes resolution, that our judicial system only handles about 10% of cases. For me, that would be a concern even for lawyers, that only 10%, but then we are calling it alternative.
Yes.
But okay, be it as it may, so we can talk about alternative in the context of the cases that we have, that have been filed in court.
Yes.
Yes, because then that would also help, because one of the things that the rule of law also deals with is the issue of access to justice.
Yes.
Because then we know that the court system is actually encumbered by technicality, procedural technicality, it's expensive.
Yes.
Some people might not, a number of people, if you go to the up countries, then courts are in very far places. So when we talk about access to justice, it's not just, of course, it's not just about the money. Yes, financial aspects very important. They've become very expensive for so many people, but also geography. If you look at the geographical locations of these courts, far away, so that also discourages people even from going. They file courts and then they're not able to go. They're saying, I didn't have a fare. You have cases where a witness has not shown up because they were not able to come to court because they didn't have money.
Yeah.
So that's also aspect. So I think, in my view, if we were to take the rule of law seriously, then alternative dispute resolution mechanism, as provided for in Article 159, is very much one of the ways through which we can be able to deal with these issues in the context of cases that have already been filed in court. But otherwise, for us, we've always been doing this for a long time. 90% of cases this country, and indeed Africa,
it's so
is
huge.
through alternative, or what you call traditional dispute resolution mechanism.
Do you think that's points out to, the rampant cases of mob justice? Because if 90% of the cases are not handled in court, they are handled, within our own I don't want to call them our own outfits that we deem can handle the cases, then it means then that we do not really espouse the judicial system way of handling these particular disputes. But in the case where these 90%, the alternative dispute resolution mechanism do not handle them conclusively, then people decide to do mob justice or take, actions into their own hands. Does that study attribute to that linkage?
Actually, for me, with regard to mob justice, it's not about the alternative dispute resolution mechanism. It's about our judicial system.
Okay.
Because people, and if you hear people talk, they're saying that the system is too slow.
Yeah.
It's too complex.
Yeah.
And then, more importantly, that people go and then you see them out.
Yeah.
So then they're
complain.
left. Yes. So then why don't we just finish? It's not a good way, because then again, that also creates disorder in society, social disorder, anarchy, and rule of law is there to address the issue of social order. If that lacks, then we are talking about anarchy.
Yes.
But people also do not have faith in our judicial system because of, you've had allegations of corruptions within the judicial system. Oh, these guys will go and pay. And then the next thing, you'll see them out. Of course, walking around. So then people take the matters into their own hands because of the fact that our judicial system is not responsive enough. Judicial system, let's say the court system, is not responsive to the needs of society. And therefore, they feel they better take actions or matters into their own hands. Not because of lack of faith in the alternative, but because of the judicial system. Yeah, you know, for lawyers, we actually trained to think that, because that's also our training, that as a lawyer, there's no other way of resolving disputes than the judicial system.
Yes.
So we encourage to always defend our judicial system.
Yeah.
So it's about the judiciary, nothing else. And that's why, even when this idea of mediation, the court annex mediation began, lawyers were not very happy because for them it was a matter of bread and butter.
Yes.
So these things going to take matters. But of course now I'm happy I'm seeing so many lawyers are now training in mediation, even though, there are studies are also showing that lawyers aren't very good mediators. But now actually they're embracing it. But it's taken time, if you think about it. It's really taken time for lawyers to embrace because they're thinking that, no, they're going to lose.
Yeah, it's about survival.
Yes. But it's a good thing. It's really a good thing.
All right.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Advocate Otieno. That particular discussion has created a basis for what we're going to discuss tonight. Do stay with us. We're taking our first break, but once we come back, we'll be talking about the issue of separation of power in Kenya and what the three arms of government are doing in terms of ensuring the rule of law in the country. See you on the other side of this break.
Na uso wa jamii. Kupanda shuka, akawa tuzo. Ukakamavu wake, ukatii, na kumfanya mwenye bidii. Kwa machozi na makeke, akabaini jinsi ya kuwini. Huyu ni mwanamke ngangari, kwa jinsi alivyo ngari-ngari. Mimi ni mwanamke mwake. Usikose kutazama kipindi cha mwanamke mwake, nami Caroline Kimwell.
They are powerful and influential. They make decisions in politics, education, finance, agriculture, health, sports, and all aspects of human life. But the impact of their decisions falls on you, the common citizen. KUTV Primetime News Thursday. We ask bold questions and pursue answers to the core to bring you closer to the story. We couldn't have it any other way. Join me, Auma Evans, as I raise matters of social concern to raise your voice from the background to the foreground.
Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Law Matters. We are on the second segment of this particular show, talking about the issue of rule of law in Kenya, seeing whether it's practical or it's more of theory, having Advocate Otieno to give us a perspective on what we're having in the country at the moment. Now, Advocate Otieno, when we look into the issue of fair administration of justice, which, looks into the issue of equality before the law, do you think there's Kenyans who cannot afford a legal counsel actually gets fair administration of justice, given that the government has a mandate to provide a legal counsel for them? Or is the judiciary system only for those who can afford good lawyers?
Unfortunately, I have to say this again, that it would appear to me that the law is only for those who can afford, those who have money. If you want to know that, all you need to do, one just needs to walk to the Nairobi remand, it's on industrial area, and see how many Kenyans are stranded there. They do not have legal representation, number one, and yet it's a right under the Constitution. So, of course, what that shows you is that the philosophy, the principle is very good. But then the practice, there's a gap between the principle and the practice, the law. Because what do we see? In the Constitution, right to legal representation. The government has legal aid. There's Legal Aid Act in this country. There's even a council, Legal Aid Council. The last time I met some senior official was that the response was that we do not even have a budget yet.
They're underfunded.
But the act came into place in 2016.
Wow.
2016 and now, that's about 9 years. We do not have funds. We are underfunded. We don't even have money. And then you have these guys at the mercy of a few lawyers who want to do pro bono. But then lawyers can never do pro bono forever with these delays in court and all that. So one would appear once and then they abandon. You go to all these other courts. I found a young man who had been in court, had been accused of having defiled a lady, a minor, and he didn't have money. He was in Ngong police station cell, in the cell, for about 3 years. His mother even passed away. He didn't even go. He was not even told. He was told much later. Somebody brought it to my attention. Then I offered through my assistant in the office to do a pro bono. And it turned out that this guy did not even commit the offense that he was.
So sad.
He had not even got. That was the minor he had allegedly defiled was his friend's girlfriend.
So there was no.
So there was no connection. It's only that they were found. His friend had stepped out, and then somebody went there and then found. And the lady used his mobile phone to call the mother, and that's how he was tracked later on. Yes, but then it turned out, and the court dismissed it. But he had taken 3 years, and there was no one. He didn't have money. He's a guy who had just finished college. He was stomaching.
And you can imagine the number of people.
So there are so many. You go there are so many people are so desperate out there. And these people are in government facilities. I mean, they're in the remand, they're in the police station, so they don't have nothing. And they're confused. And you see, sometimes we are also tempted to say, okay, the law is for everybody, but the law protects also those who know about it. If you do not know that your rights have been violated or are being violated, you not even challenge that. You not even make any claim. So there are so many innocent, ignorant Kenyans out there who are suffering. And yet, we are talking about right to legal what? Representation. Which is also part of this fairness and access to justice. Justice and fairness, hallmarks of the rule of law.
And can somebody now then, if we are having a provision to have legal aid in the country, the government has either deliberately or out of their own wisdom or lack of it decided not to fund this particular function of government, can then somebody move to civil societies, can they move to sue the government for actually violating the law and ensuring that, some people have unfair access to justice?
Yes, of course they can. They can. The governments need to be, a lot of pressure need to be put on the government, whether by the civil society or whatever groups need to be put. But you see, there's always about budget, and then courts sometimes also don't want to get into policy issues, even though they do. But then, what they will be asking the Attorney General, can you give us a policy framework on when is this going to be implemented? Oh, we still don't have a budget. We will give you something and all that. A country like UK, for example, legal representation is a right of everyone. So you are arrested today, you'll get a lawyer, and the police will even assist you to get at the list. They have a list there.
So you get to choose.
So you don't even have to wait. You'll get, even me as a foreigner, I was in the UK and I'm a student and I was found driving without license. Guys, found driving without license, and I was arrested, and I was still given a representative. Yes, that's what happens. It's mandatory. There's no question about it. You'll get, they're there, and those lawyers also paid by the government to offer those services. So there are lawyers who are only doing those kind of work. That's what they do. And it's sufficient for them, and they're doing very well. But it's only because we don't take rights seriously in this country. That's my view. We do not take rights seriously in this country, and especially, like I was telling you, the business of law is categorization. Legal, but then there's also this issue of those who are superhuman, those who are less human, and those who are even inhuman. So if you're less human, nobody really cares about you. We do not care about the citizens in this country, those who are in authority. Don't care. Politicians don't care.
They don't actually.
Yes, they really don't care about ordinary citizens.
Unless it's about them, they really.
It's always about them. It's always about them.
Yeah, and talking about the political class, looking into the issue of separation of powers, which is an aspect of the rule of law, we have seen some sort of a, some teeth there, push and pull between, certain arms of government. We have seen others swallowed by another arm of government. Interpretation of the rule of law and separation of powers, looking into what is happening currently. How do you perceive it?
Again, another principle that's very good in terms of, if you look at its theory, or the philosophy rationale around it, it's very important. We need to have government, but then we have to separate. So we have the executive, we have the judiciary, we have the legislature. And the idea here is about checks and balances.
Yeah.
What do we see? Executive, historically, has always swallowed parliament. You hear cases where MPs, parliamentarians, go to State House and they're given money even to take a position on particular issues.
Sure.
You have seen in this country, especially last year, let's just go back to the finance bill, where the executive was the one behind the finance bill. Of course, the citizens said no. What happened? And parliaments were being told, don't pass that one. Did they even listen? They didn't listen. And then you hear, and a whip, a minority whip, goes in public to say that we bribed people. We gave them money. That cannot happen in Kenya. We gave them money to vote, and this is how we voted. And people were given money. So number one. Number two, judiciary. It's the executive that funds the judiciary. In the constitution, there's something called the judiciary fund.
Yes.
It's not been. And then you've had even politicians, including the executive, also telling judiciary, we will cut your budget. And they've always cut their budgets.
Yeah.
You saw last year, judiciary was in the process of recruiting judges. And they had to shelve the idea because they were not given the funds to do so. People were supposed to go, and even the dates for interview had already been indicated, had already been invited to go for interviews for the Court of Appeal, if you remember.
Yes.
And they were told, no, we will not continue. And they gave a press statement saying they not continue the interviews because they do not have money. So all along, every time judiciary makes decisions that go against the executive, then they are starved of funds. We see that all the time. Yes. We see even parliamentarians, the parliament, fighting also with the judiciary. You hear things like judicial overreach. Activism, judicial activism. We are getting into our own area. This is political process. Thou shalt not get into what? Into political issues. We'll solve these issues politically. So there's always an issue. So yes, we can say, very beautiful idea. The rationale is good, great, that we need to have separation of powers. But we don't have separation of power in this country. We do not have separation of power in this country. It's actually in theory. But in practice, there's a serious gap. And we need, as a country, I think, to reflect, and even as lawyers, to reflect on that issue. How then can we make this issue of separation of power practical in a way that would serve the country?
The interest of the people.
Yes.
When you talk about judicial activism, which is something that has been thrown all over by the political class to say, judiciary is overreaching when it comes to political disputes. If you wait and look into how judiciary has been ruling when it comes to political matters, including those touching the executive, do you think really there's an overreach? Is there a time where actually there has been judicial activism, or is it a point of the executive feeling this, it is superior, and therefore the judiciary should not really interfere with the policies or whatever they're working on as a regime?
I actually, personally, I do not think that there has been judicial overreach in this country. If you look, I just can't remember the specific article, but you look at the power that is given to the judiciary to interpret the law. That's the authority that judiciary has. And in that interpretation, the Constitution requires that, as you interpret the law, you need to take social, economic, political, and cultural context. Because we are saying law reflects society. It's a mirror of society that reflects our norms. But you also need to take the political, the economic and cultural context in which law operates. You cannot run away from that. We haven't quite addressed that as a people. That's something that has always escaped us. But also, even though we are saying that judiciary courts, judges really don't make law, they really don't make law? Because we think of laws as statutes, as what Parliament passed down. But so much of law actually comes from courts. Individual moments of disputes, when people go to court, the judge is faced with the task of resolving disputes. And we've seen new legal principles develop as a result of that. That we also use to address some of these issues. Individual moments of disputes, when people go to court, then courts come up with new legal principles that have shaped our laws. Yes, but when it does not suit it does not suit the executive, for example, they will talk about judicial overreach. When it does not suit the politicians, they will always talk about judicial overreach. Yes. So, or activism, as it were. How else are we going to develop our laws? We have even seen cases where the court has rendered a particular provision of an act of parliament unconstitutional. But what do these politicians say? Judicial overreach.
So you've talked about the balance. If we create a balance in a way that separation of powers is enshrined when it comes to the freedom of government, then we'll have made steps. But then the interdependence between these arms of government, sometimes somebody might perceive it to be counter-effective, because judiciary cannot really be independent because they know they depend on the executive on this, or they depend on Parliament on this. Parliament cannot really be independent because they depend on the executive on this and that. And therefore that interdependence sometimes, some have argued, has been counter-effective in ensuring independence. From where you sit, how do we create that balance with the interdependence that might be taken advantage of?
I think the starting point for me would be respect for the law. Kenyans have no respect for the rule of law. If the law says judiciary is independent and these are its functions, these are the functions of the executive, well spelled in the Constitution. You can look at even Article 131, talking about the powers that the president has, the powers that the judiciary has, the powers that the parliament has. We just need to respect those ones. The idea is just simply, in fact, it might not even require doing something unusual. We just don't have respect for the rule of law. And that's why, for some of us, we are questioning to what extent is this really reflect really who we are as a people. We simply just don't respect this. Because how else would we explain someone being summoned by court and then they don't go because they are powerful? How else would we explain someone appears, I think it was a few years ago, appears was summoned and there's some order was given, and then he says a court order is something that he can use to go. I can't even say that. It's a piece of paper. Yet we do know that as far as the rule of law is concerned, when a court pronounces itself, gives an order, then that demands obedience forthwith. If you have a problem with it, go back to court for review, or you go and appeal. Court order does not have period of infancy. So you say, like a baby. So a new baby has just been born, then you give them time to scroll, do that, talk, and start eating, all that kind of stuff. Does not have, it commands obedience forthwith. Yes, but then for us it's about attitude. It's about the values that I don't know even whether we have values in this country as a people. We have no respect for the rule of law. Yes. I remember there was a time I was in South Africa for a conference, and we had gone for dinner. So we were being taken back to the hotel. It's midnight. We're the only ones. And then there was only one in that road. There was only one vehicle. Midnight. The lights are red. And the guy stops. So we find him. He has stopped and he's alone. That cannot happen in Kenya.
It cannot happen. Even during the day.
Even during the day, it cannot happen in this country. Look at even when people are driving and somebody is trying to cross the road, nobody wants to stop. We don't even have courtesy. So sometimes you even don't know what kind of people we are. Look at even these riders.
Boda.
You know, the direction is showing you are supposed to go that direction. So you find those who are going that direction, there's other ones are also coming here. And it's chaos everywhere.
Yeah.
It's chaos. Sometimes one is even afraid going into the streets.
Yeah.
It's chaos everywhere. So we must, I don't know what can be done, but I think we need to have a conversation as citizens of this country and say that, yes, we are going to be bound by the rule of law for the first. But it's said in theory, but then we see the opposite.
Yeah.
Yes. So people are saying one thing, but those who are in authority don't even listen, are doing the others. It's about their interest. It's not even about the interest of the country.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Advocate Otieno. For that, we'll be taking our final break, but do stay with us. We'll be back with more, including an interactive segment with the audience in terms of asking questions on this particular topic, bringing the discussion to a close.
Badala ya kutafuta kazi, tunaweza kuanzisha miradi yetu ambayo ingetusaidia kubadilisha maisha ya wazazi wetu.
Kwa vijana wenzangu, wengi hawana kazi, lakini ikiwa sisi wenyewe tutajiamini, tunaweza kujiajiri wenyewe.
Afrika kwa kweli tuna mahitaji ambayo ukiyasuluhisha unaweza kuathiri watu kwenye bara hili.
Bila woga, watu huwa na uzalishaji zaidi, wanajawa na ujasiri, wanakuwa wabunifu na wanakuwa wenye maarifa.
Niliamua kuacha kazi. Hata kama sitafanikiwa, nitakuwa nimejaribu, nitakuwa najua haiwezekani.
Hakuna kitu cha ajabu hapa. Kila anayepata ufanisi hufanya kazi usiku na mchana.
Kitu kitakusukuma na kuwezesha kupata maarifa ambayo hukuwa nayo.
Tunajaribu kutengeneza kitu kitakachopita mipaka ya nchi hii.
Ikiwa unataka kubadilisha ulimwengu, anza na nyumbani.
So my name is Jakub Petri. I'm Associate Professor in the Institute of Philosophy of Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. And I'm the main coordinator of the CAFE project, which is being here hosted by KUTV University.
My name is Ewa Hudoba. I am a project manager in this consortium. Keep watching cutting-edge research at KUTV University Television.
Thank you for staying with us. You're watching Law Matters. We're on the tail end of this particular show, talking about the rule of law in Kenya and looking into how, as Kenyans, we interact with the law concerning the issue of supremacy of the law. In this particular segment, we allow our audience to ask questions to our guest, Advocate Otieno, of course, for them to have their own perspective concerning this particular discussion. So I'll give the first chance to the gentleman in grey. Yeah.
My name is Kivu Varegan. I'm a third-year student, and my question is one. We've reckoned that the implementation is the problem. So in your experience, what do you think are some of the ways that we really can bring the rule of law into implementation, and if we can borrow from any African state, because borrowing from the West is a little bit difficult because the context is not really the same and they have progressive democracies than we have here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's a good question. The second question?
My name is Sarah Theory, and my question is, with how the youths want to be engaged in matters concerning the law because of the constitution and how the matters that are progressing, where do you see the country in the next 10 years?
All right. Thank you so much, Sarah. The third question?
My name is Lawrence Nyakundi, and I want to ask about, listening to you, I found that the perspective you're giving is more kind of into the negative, in that you believe that separation of power, the rule of law, is kind of a theory in Kenya. So I was asking, in terms of separation of power, can you say something kind of positive or something that has kind of is positive? Because we cannot say that Kenya has failed in totality. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. Lawrence is not into the negative aspect. Can you be a bit more optimistic? Do you have another question? Sorry, yes.
Let me start with Lawrence. Lawrence, I hope you're a law student. Yes, there's something I like, which is called critical engagement. We have to critically engage with the law, so that I'm not against separation of powers. For example, these are very important principles that really underlie our country's progress. It's very important for us to note that. However, it's important for us to examine this critically, because when we critique, that's when we can make room for improvement.
Yes.
Okay? So I'm not saying it's bad. The theory of it is very beautiful. But what do we see in practice? Because there has to be, you look at the practice of the separation of power, and then the theory, the theory of the separation of power and the practice of it. It's the same way we could say that, when you look at human rights, the idea of human rights, such a noble idea that human rights has somehow triumphed. Everyone is talking about human rights. But in practice, what do we see? More violations of what? Of human rights. Everywhere. So we need to speak about these things. That's the only way we are able to think of how then we can improve. I'm not saying that we do away with separation of power. Now, for example, can you look at the way, can you actually just look at the way the executive has been treating judiciary and then say all is well? We have had cases where even individual judges are being threatened by these politicians, singling out a judge to say that we are going to remove you. And yet we do know that the separation of power, a judge is independent in terms of, even independence in terms of decision that they make. The judiciary as a branch of government is independent in terms of how they carry out their things. But then somebody, on account of a decision that you've made as a judicial officer, then somebody threatens your life. We have had that. We've seen that, unless you guys are not reading. I can give you an example because it was in public. The former deputy president threatened Justice Esther Maina, who was handling a case that was involving him, corruption case, because she was in the anti-corruption court at that particular time. Can we say that's good? Okay, we have separation of powers and then clap? No, we cannot do that. We must interrogate these things, and because for me, I'm looking at those theories, those principles, but then we're also looking at the practice of those principles. We talk about human rights, we talk about protection, the fundamental rule of law and human rights being part of it, is seeking to protect individual liberties and stuff like that. But then we see the opposite. We cannot actually, as a lawyer and as a scholar, cannot say that that's good. That's not good. We have had cases where judiciary's funds have been cut by the executive because they have made decisions that are not favorable to the executive, and we see that, and that has also impaired their work. Like as an example I was giving, where they were supposed to hire Court of Appeal judges, and then they had to shelve the idea because they didn't have money. The executive said, "We are not going to give you money," and then the executive has also not even done what they're supposed to do in terms of operationalizing the judiciary fund that would make judiciary independent. Nobody is not in the interest of the executive for judiciary to be independent in terms of even with the resources that they are able to manage their own resources, so because of their own interests. So I'm not saying that these principles are bad. No, I'm looking at how, in terms of practice, why is it that there's a gap between the principle but also the practice? That's all I'm talking about.
All right.
So it's good for us to have critical engagement with this so that we can think of how then they can better work for us.
Yes.
Your question was on
implementation.
How then, what do I suggest that we should do with regard to this issue of rule of law?
Yeah.
Was that your question?
Yeah.
I think, okay, for me, the problem is not just with the politicians or those who are in power, whether at judicial, those who wielding judicial power, executive power, parliamentary power. It's a societal problem, in my view. Why do I say so? If you are in this country, I know you're still young, but this is a country where if my tribe mate is a cabinet secretary and they have embezzled funds in this country, apparently they steal on behalf of the community. And you've seen community even rallying behind them. So when they're being sacked or they're being singled out, they say, oh, they're targeting my what? my community because they're eating on behalf of, apparently on behalf of the community. That's problematic because that's a society of chaos. That's not a society of rule of law. Because then we need to get to a point, so the solution, what the solution perhaps is maybe public awareness and education so that people are property aware, are made aware of their rights and how then they can be able to hold these public officials accountable. Because at the end of the day, when they embezzle these funds, it's them and their family. So public awareness, but then I also do not know what can be done as a general level in terms of changing the attitudes of Kenyans towards respecting the law, the rule of law. So that, and it starts, because, even when we talk about politicians, I always ask, where do they come from? Where do these politicians come from? Because how come we are complaining every now and again? 5 years gone, we elect new ones, it's still the same complaint. People are still crying. How? Why is it that? So I think they also reflect the society. Because these politicians, you and I, they come from yourselves. They come from society. So it's a general reflection of how our society is. So perhaps we need to think of how then, if law is going to work, because law is doing our work. Law is creating social order. Law is doing all these things, protection of liberty and all this kind of stuff. So it's doing our work. And the only thing that law requires from us is obedience. It commands obedience, that we've got to obey the law. So we are not a country of rule of law. We talk about it, Lawrence, we talk about the rule of law, but we don't even know whether it has meaning in our in our lives. It doesn't reflect who we are as a people, and that's where I have a problem. Yes, not that I'm just being negative, but it's critical engagement. Because why are we still having all these problems?
Yeah. Which is
for example, even on the issue of human rights, you see there's also right, there's this right to work. 60% of Kenyans, young people coming out of universities and colleges don't have what? Employee. Yet you have a right to do what? To work. So sometimes, I don't know whether it's a fantasy, gives you some comfort that you've got this right, but then you cannot realize this right. So it's problematic. So we need to critically engage with these concepts. Because as a lawyer, concept matters. Principles matters. Words matters. So they have to make sense. Because they are there to help society, to protect society, help us to grow socially, economically, and even culturally.
Okay.
Yes.
There was a final question by Sarah concerning
your question. Sorry, I lost that.
It was the issue of the youth in the country. How can they be part of implementing the rule of law, and where you see the country 10 years from now?
Yes, the youth because they've always also said that the future belongs to the youth. But when it comes to appointment that we see in this country, always people being recycled. Even those who have retired are being brought up. Have you observed that, Lawrence? Yes. So, something almost happened in this country last year, June. When the Gen Zs were saying that, you guys were saying that you are tribeless. That was very important. That although I didn't agree with the idea that you are leaderless, that's a little problematic. But I can understand when you said we are tribeless, because tribalism has affected this country historically. Yeah. We know it is a serious vice. I also understood when you said you are partyless, because we know what tribalism and these political parties actually do, and the harm that they have caused this country. But I was also thinking that because the Gen Zs, young people like yourselves are more aware of your rights. And therefore, for me, I think we need to continue the fight. We need to hold these politicians, our leaders, to account. Not just politicians, but leaders in public offices, leaders across board. But we also must also show that we also understand this concept of rule of law, that we also obey laws ourselves. So that it also actually begins from us. But there's also a sense in which you can say that, this thing begins from, it falls it rises and falls on leadership. So that by the time you get to position of leadership, then you are able to change this. But you don't have to wait until you're in position of leadership. So what are we doing amongst ourselves in our small spaces? What is it that we are doing that reflect this noble, grand idea of, or grand concept of the rule of law? What is it that we do? Am I obeying these laws myself? Do I believe in the concept of rule of law myself? What is it that I'm doing? But then accountability is very important. In fact, it's one of the tenets or concepts of the rule of law, accountability, so that we're able to hold these individuals accountable. I think that's one way of looking at it. But you see, the problem is, and it could also be a colonial problem. I've forgotten your name, but you're also saying that, no, we cannot look at the West because
their systems.
Their systems. But you see, we don't have to wait. You know, some people have also said, oh, it took them 200 years. If we know that it took them 200 years, why don't we just do what they do now? We don't have to take 200 years for us to get there, because there's already something for us that we can borrow. But you see, they told us that the African customary law is primitive and repugnant to justice. Even though we haven't quite asked, we didn't ask then, we are not asking now, whose justice are we talking about and whose morality are we talking about? So that's also very problematic. And you see, if our laws are to reflect who we are, then we also need to consider. Remember, there was a time we were very mindful people. The idea of Ubuntu, if you've heard of Ubuntu, you are because I am. Was an African concept, was an African norm, but then we've left it. Before, I saw a professor in the US made a comment. He was looking at the African Charter on human and people's rights. The idea that he's talking about human and peoples was very unique. The idea that when it comes to a child, that the parenthood is not just biological but also social. Your child is my child. Is that the case anymore? We don't care anymore. Your child is your business. I will not do anything to them. So there's also something we need to go back and reflect as a people our own values, and then that would help us even to obey some of these laws.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Advocate Otieno, for giving us, that well-rounded discussion concerning the rule of law. My producer is telling me you're pressed on time, but within a minute, with the political class tinkering with the constitution every now and then to their own expediency, do you think it interferes with the issue of the rule of law in the country? Because they seem to be always having their way until Gen Zs showed them that actually they can't have their way.
Yes, it does. It does. Remember, the political class, if you look at them, you'll realize that they are not after the welfare of this country. It's about themselves. But I also liked one thing that Kenyans, Kenyans are also wakening up anyway. I think that's a plus. You saw even with the BBI, Kenyans said no. Yes. And even the courts said no and sided with her. So that was a big plus. So we just need to hold these guys to account and be awake, so that whatever we monitor every move. And Gen Zs, they're already doing it. You see, we saw donations that are being given in church, but they're already what do they call it? They're greeting these leaders, so to say, which is a good thing. That shows that that we are being assertive. We are holding these guys into account. But to answer your question more directly, yes, of course, it interferes. If you look at our laws are very robust. It's only that our attitude towards them is the issue. We just disregard them. Yes, but we have a problem. Our problem generally is also about, I always say that, okay, we sometimes don't think that we are good enough. So there's also the issue of self-doubt. There's also the issue of self-pity. There's also the issue of self-hate. We do not think, as black people, as Africans, as Kenyans sometimes, that we are good enough, that we can also do good things.
Okay, thank you so much, Advocate Otieno, for making time. Because of time, we'll have to, keep it there. But many thanks for your perspective concerning the rule of law.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right, there you've had it. We are enough as black people in your little cocoons. Ensure that you implement the rule of law. Don't just wait for the political class. It starts from the bottom all the way up. My name is Irene Mwangi, and with that, have a splendid night.